The bank vault door closed behind him with a heavy metallic echo. Inside the quiet room, a grieving husband sat across from a small steel box that had belonged to his late wife. He had waited 3 years to open it. 3 years of wondering. 3 years of grief. 3 years of questions. But the moment the bank manager looked inside the box, he went pale. Then he leaned closer and whispered something that made the husband's entire world collapse, because the woman he buried was hiding something that could destroy half the city. Welcome to the Untold Story Files. My name is Arthur. I'm the one who opens the files most people never see. Every story here comes from a moment someone tried to hide, ignore, or forget. Stories about injustice, choices, and the consequences that follow. So sit back, because tonight, we're opening another file. And once it's opened, the truth inside can't be buried again. Thank you for being here. Before we continue, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel around the world. Before the story begins, a quick note. Some moments in this story have been dramatized for storytelling purposes. Names, locations, and certain details may have been changed to protect privacy. While parts of the narrative are adapted, the themes and lessons behind this story reflect real situations people experience every day. Now, let's continue the story. A grieving husband opens his late wife's safety deposit box after 3 years. Inside he finds a collection of strange documents and photographs that make no sense. A bank manager quietly pulls him aside and warns him, "Someone very powerful will not want you seeing this." The deeper he investigates, the more he realizes something terrifying. His wife wasn't just a schoolteacher. She had secretly been gathering evidence against some of the most powerful people in the city. And someone may have killed her to keep those secrets buried. But the truth hidden in that box is about to change everything. Daniel Mercer had not stepped inside a bank vault since the day his wife died. The memory of that morning still lived inside him like a scar that refused to fade. 3 years earlier, the hospital had called at 2:14 a.m. By sunrise, his entire life had collapsed. Emily Mercer, his wife of 22 years, was gone. Cancer had taken her faster than anyone expected, but even during her final days, Emily had seemed strangely calm, too calm, as if she knew something Daniel didn't. The day before she passed away, she handed him a small envelope. Inside was a single brass key and a note. Daniel had memorized every word. "When the time feels right, open the box." At the time, he thought it was sentimental. Maybe letters, memories, something she wanted him to read after she was gone. But grief is a strange thing, and Daniel wasn't ready. Not for weeks, not for months, not even for years. So the key stayed hidden in his desk drawer. Until today. The bank looked exactly the same as it had 3 years ago. Quiet, cold, professional. Daniel approached the front desk. "I need to access a safety deposit box," he said. The teller asked for identification. A few minutes later, a middle-aged bank manager appeared. His name tag read, "Richard Holloway, Vault Services." He smiled politely. "Mr. Mercer, I see the account belongs to your late wife." Daniel nodded. "Yes." The manager typed something into the computer. His expression shifted subtly, but enough for Daniel to notice. "Is everything all right?" Daniel asked. The manager forced a smile. "Yes, of course," but something about his tone sounded uneasy. "Please follow me." The vault door was enormous, thick steel, heavy hinges, layers of security. The manager unlocked the door and led Daniel into a small private room. Inside were several locked drawers for customers to open their deposit boxes. Richard slid open one drawer and inserted a key. "Your wife's box is number 417. He pulled out the small steel container and placed it gently on the table. Then he left the room. "Take your time," he said. Daniel stared at the box for a long moment. 3 years of questions, 3 years of grief, all sitting inside this tiny container. He took a deep breath and opened it. Inside were several items: a thick envelope, a small flash drive, a stack of photographs, and a leather notebook. Daniel frowned. None of it made sense. He opened the envelope first. Inside were copies of financial records, large transfers, millions of dollars moving between accounts. Some of the names were familiar: city officials, business executives, a judge. Daniel's confusion turned into unease. Why would Emily have these? He picked up the photographs. They showed meetings in parking garages, late-night exchanges, men handing envelopes to each other. And in the corner of one photo, Emily herself, holding a camera. Daniel's heart started racing. His wife hadn't been a teacher investigating school programs like she told him. She had been documenting something dangerous. Then the door opened. The bank manager stepped back inside, but the moment he saw what Daniel was holding, the color drained from his face. He quickly closed the door behind him. Then he leaned close and whispered, "You shouldn't be looking at those." Daniel blinked. "What?" The manager lowered his voice even further. There are people connected to those documents. His hands trembled slightly. People who will do anything to keep that box closed. Daniel's pulse quickened. What are you talking about? The manager hesitated, then quietly said something that made Daniel feel cold inside. Your wife wasn't just collecting evidence. He glanced toward the vault door, then finished the sentence. She was preparing to expose half the city, and someone didn't want her to succeed. For several seconds, Daniel Mercer didn't move. The quiet hum of the vault ventilation system filled the silence between them. The photographs were still spread across the table. The flash drive sat beside them. The leather notebook remained closed, but the bank manager's words echoed inside Daniel's mind. Your wife was preparing to expose half the city. Daniel stared at him. What exactly are you saying? The manager hesitated. His eyes shifted toward the vault door again. Mr. Mercer, I shouldn't be telling you this. Daniel's voice hardened. You already started. The man sighed. Then he lowered his voice. Your wife came here several times during the last year of her life. Daniel blinked. That's impossible. She came alone, the manager continued. Always quiet, always nervous. And every time she visited this box, she added more documents. Daniel's chest tightened. Emily had told him she was staying late at school during those months. Teacher meetings, curriculum planning, parent conferences, but now none of it made sense. What did she say she was doing? Daniel asked. The manager rubbed his temples. She never explained, but the last time she came here, she asked me a strange question. Daniel leaned forward. What question? The manager looked directly into his eyes. She asked what would happen if someone tried to access the box after she died. The words landed like a weight. Daniel's throat went dry. She said that. The manager nodded slowly. Yes, Daniel suddenly felt the room grow colder. Emily had known. Somehow she had known she might not live long enough to reveal whatever this was. The manager continued speaking. She also asked something else. Daniel swallowed. What? She asked if anyone had ever tried to break into a safety deposit box before. Daniel stared at him, and the manager exhaled. Not in this bank. Silence filled the room again. Then Daniel picked up the leather notebook. The cover was worn. Edges slightly curled. It looked like something Emily had carried for months, maybe longer. Slowly, he opened it. Inside were pages of handwritten notes, dates, names, addresses, numbers. Some entries were circled. Others were underlined multiple times. Daniel flipped through the pages carefully. At first, it looked like random information, but then something caught his eye. A list of companies, construction firms, development corporations, real estate groups, and beside each company, a city official's name, mayor's office, city council members, planning department directors. Daniel frowned. What is this? The manager leaned closer when he saw the page. His face tightened. I was afraid of this. Afraid of what? Daniel asked. The manager pointed at one name, a name that Daniel immediately recognized. Councilman Robert Halstead, one of the most powerful politicians in the city. But beneath the name, Emily had written something in bold red ink. $42,000 parking garage project. Daniel's stomach dropped. Bribe money. It had to be. He flipped another page. Another politician, another company, another amount. $18,000, $75,000, $120,000. Page after page, transaction after transaction, a map of corruption. And Emily had been tracking all of it. Daniel suddenly realized something. She wasn't just collecting evidence. The manager nodded slowly. No. Daniel held up the notebook. She was building a case. Yes. The manager looked toward the vault door again, and for the first time since entering the room, Daniel noticed something strange. The man looked genuinely afraid. Why are you so nervous? Daniel asked. The manager lowered his voice. Because 2 months after your wife died, someone came here asking about this box. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. Who? The manager shook his head. He didn't give a name. What did he look like? Tall, dark suit, very calm. The manager swallowed, but the strange thing wasn't how he looked. Daniel waited. It was what he knew. What do you mean? He knew your wife's box number. Daniel's heart skipped. How could he know that? The manager answered quietly. I have no idea. Daniel looked back at the photographs. One image showed a man standing beside a black car. A streetlight illuminated part of his face. The same man handing an envelope to another person. Daniel pushed the photo toward the manager. Was it him? The manager froze. For several seconds he didn't speak. Then he slowly nodded. Yes. Daniel felt his chest tighten. What did he want? The manager's voice dropped to almost a whisper. He asked if anyone had accessed the box. Daniel's pulse quickened, and I told him no. The manager hesitated again. Then he added something that made Daniel's stomach twist. But before he left, The manager looked Daniel directly in the eyes. He told me something. Daniel leaned forward. What? The manager repeated the words slowly. If anyone ever opens that box, he swallowed. Call me immediately. Daniel's hands tightened around the notebook. Did you call him? The manager shook his head quickly. No, why not? The man leaned closer. Because of what he said next. Daniel felt the air leave his lungs. He said the contents of the box could destroy careers. The manager's voice trembled slightly. Put people in prison. Then he finished the sentence. And expose a network that has been running this city for 20 years. Daniel stared at the photographs again. The documents. The flash drive. The notebook. His wife had been investigating a corruption network. One powerful enough to scare a bank manager. One powerful enough to send men searching for evidence after she died. Daniel slowly looked up. Why are you telling me this? The manager answered honestly. Because if your wife died while investigating these people. He glanced at the vault door again. Then you may already be in danger. Daniel felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. For 3 years he believed Emily died from illness alone. But now a terrifying thought began forming. What if the cancer wasn't the only reason she died? What if someone had been watching her, following her, waiting for the moment when she became too close to the truth? Daniel suddenly closed the notebook. We need to see what's on this flash drive. The manager looked uneasy. There's a computer upstairs. Daniel picked it up. For a moment, he imagined Emily sitting at their kitchen table late at night, writing these notes, collecting these photographs, knowing the danger, knowing the risk, and leaving it all behind for him to find. Daniel took a deep breath. Let's go. But as they stepped out of the vault, Daniel noticed something strange. Across the lobby near the entrance, a tall man stood beside the security desk, dark suit, calm expression, watching them. And the moment Daniel stepped into the light, the man slowly smiled. And what Daniel Mercer didn't realize yet was that opening that safety deposit box had just triggered something, a signal, a chain reaction. Because the moment that box was opened, the people Emily Mercer had been investigating finally knew one thing. The evidence still existed, and the one person holding it now was standing in the middle of a bank lobby, holding a flash drive that could destroy them all. Daniel Mercer stopped walking. The bank lobby suddenly felt too bright, too quiet, too exposed. Across the room, the tall man in the dark suit remained perfectly still beside the security desk, watching, not pretending to look elsewhere, not checking his phone, just watching Daniel. The same calm expression, the same face Daniel had seen in the photograph inside the safety deposit box. Behind him, the bank manager, Richard Holloway, whispered nervously, "Mr. Mercer, do you know that man?" Daniel kept his eyes forward. "Yes." The manager's voice tightened. "From the photographs." Daniel nodded once. "Then we should leave." But Daniel didn't move, because the man across the lobby suddenly smiled. Not a friendly smile, a knowing smile. The kind that said, "I know exactly what you just found." Then the man turned calmly and walked toward the exit. Within seconds he disappeared through the bank doors. The manager exhaled slowly. "That's not good." Daniel's pulse was racing. "Do you think he saw us come out of the vault?" "Yes." "And you're sure that's the same man who came asking about the box?" "I'm certain." Daniel looked down at the flash drive in his hand. It suddenly felt heavier than before, as if the tiny piece of plastic carried far more than just files. It carried secrets. Secrets that powerful people clearly wanted buried. "Where's the nearest computer?" Daniel asked. The manager pointed toward a hallway. "Employee office upstairs. Let's go." The office was small and quiet. A single desk, one computer, a window looking out over the street. Daniel closed the door behind them. Then he inserted the flash drive. The screen blinked. A folder appeared. Inside it were several files, video recordings, audio recordings, scanned documents, and one file labeled simply, "If something happens to me." Daniel froze. The manager looked over his shoulder. "You should probably open that one first." Daniel slowly clicked the file. The screen turned black. Then a video began playing. At first the camera shook slightly, as if someone had just placed a phone on a table. Then Emily appeared on screen, alive, serious, focused. Not the warm smile Daniel remembered, but a determined expression he had never seen before. She leaned closer to the camera. "If you're watching this, then something has probably happened to me." Daniel felt his throat tighten. Emily continued speaking calmly. "I know how that sounds, but the information I've collected over the past 2 years has put me in a dangerous position." The manager looked stunned. Daniel felt his heart pounding. Emily's voice remained steady. "I started investigating something that looked like simple corruption inside the city's development office. But the deeper I looked," she shook her head, "the bigger it became. The screen cut briefly to several scanned documents, emails, contracts, financial transfers. Then the video returned to Emily. This isn't just bribery. Her voice grew darker. It's a system. Daniel leaned closer. Emily continued. Developers pay city officials to approve projects that should never pass inspection. Buildings that violate safety codes. Parking garages built with substandard materials. Entire neighborhoods rezoned illegally. Daniel's mind raced. The notebook, the companies, the politicians. It all started connecting. But Emily wasn't finished, and the reason they do it, she took a breath, is because they know the buildings will fail. Daniel frowned. What? The manager whispered the same word. Emily continued explaining. When these buildings eventually collapse or require massive repairs, she held up another document. The same companies receive the repair contracts. Daniel's stomach dropped. They were building unsafe structures on purpose, so they could profit twice. Construction, then repair. Emily continued. It's a cycle, and the people involved have made hundreds of millions of dollars. Daniel leaned back slowly. This wasn't just corruption. This was a citywide fraud operation. But Emily's voice suddenly lowered. And I discovered something even worse. Daniel felt a chill. Emily looked directly into the camera. One of these buildings has already failed. The screen changed. A photograph appeared. A collapsed parking garage, emergency vehicles, crowds, police tape. Daniel recognized the image instantly 3 years ago. The riverside parking structure collapsed. 7 people had died. 22 were injured. Investigators blamed faulty design, but no one had ever been charged. Emily's voice returned. That collapse wasn't an accident. Daniel's chest tightened. It was inevitable. The manager stared at the screen in shock. Emily continued speaking. The inspection reports were falsified. The construction company used cheaper materials, and city officials approved the project anyway. The screen changed again. Another photograph. A man shaking hands with Councilman Robert Halstead, the same politician whose name appeared repeatedly in the notebook. Then Emily said something that made Daniel's blood run cold. And I have proof. Another folder appeared automatically. Inside were several recordings, secret audio files. Daniel clicked the first one. Voices filled the room. 2 men speaking quietly, discussing payments, permits, approval timelines. Then one voice said something unmistakable. If the structure fails in 10 years, that's not our problem. The second voice laughed. By then we'll be rebuilding it. The manager whispered, "Oh my God." Daniel's hands were shaking. This was evidence, real evidence, enough to destroy careers, enough to send people to prison, enough to explain why someone had been searching for Emily's safety deposit box. Then the video resumed. Emily's face appeared again, but this time her expression had changed. She looked tired, worried. I've sent copies of this information to multiple locations. Daniel blinked. Multiple locations. Emily continued. If anything happens to me, someone will eventually expose this. But if you're the one watching this, Daniel, his breath stopped. Then I'm sorry. The room went silent. I never wanted to put you in danger. Daniel felt his eyes burning. Emily's voice softened. But I couldn't ignore what I discovered. She took a deep breath. 7 people died in that parking garage collapse. And the people responsible are still in power. Daniel clenched his jaw. Emily looked straight into the camera one final time. If you choose to walk away from this, she nodded slowly. I will understand. Then she finished the message. But if you decide to finish what I started, her voice became firm again. The next piece of evidence is inside the notebook. The screen went black. For several seconds neither man spoke. The office was completely silent. Daniel stared at the blank screen. The manager whispered. She knew. Daniel nodded slowly. She knew someone might kill her. The manager looked uneasy. And now they know you have the evidence. Daniel looked down at the notebook. Emily's handwriting. The red circles, the marked pages. She had left a trail, a path for someone to follow. Daniel slowly opened the notebook again, and that's when he noticed something he hadn't seen before. A small folded piece of paper tucked into the back cover. He unfolded it carefully. Inside was a single sentence written in Emily's handwriting. Start with the judge. Daniel frowned. What judge? The manager leaned closer, but when he saw the name written underneath, his face turned pale again, because the name in the notebook wasn't just any judge. It was the man who had presided over the investigation of the parking garage collapse, and according to Emily's notes, he had been paid to bury the case. At that moment, Daniel Mercer realized something terrifying. His wife hadn't just uncovered corruption, she had uncovered an entire system protecting it. Politicians, developers, inspectors, and now even judges. But Daniel didn't know the most dangerous truth yet, because the man who had just watched him leave the bank was not just another businessman. He was the person responsible for making sure secrets like this never reached a courtroom. The office felt smaller now, as if the walls had quietly moved closer while Daniel Mercer watched the video. The notebook remained open on the desk. Emily's handwriting stared back at him. 2 words circled in red ink. Judge Alan Whitaker, the same judge who had presided over the official investigation of the Riverside parking structure collapse. The same judge who had ruled that the disaster was the result of unavoidable structural failure. No criminal charges, no arrests, just a tragedy. At least, that's what everyone believed. Until now. Daniel ran his hand across his face. This doesn't make sense. The bank manager, Richard Holloway, looked uneasy. What part? All of it, Daniel replied. He pointed at the notebook. If a judge was involved, that means this operation is even bigger than Emily thought. Richard nodded slowly. Yes. Daniel leaned back in the chair. And if Emily discovered that... He stopped, because another realization hit him. She wasn't just collecting evidence. Richard finished the thought quietly. She was preparing to bring the entire system down. The computer screen still displayed the files from the flash drive, dozens of recordings, documents, emails. Daniel scrolled through them. Each file revealed another layer of corruption, another illegal payment, another suspicious approval. Then something caught his attention, a video file. Its name was different from the others. Instead of a date, it had a location. Whitaker meeting underground garage. Daniel felt his pulse quicken. Did Emily record the judge? Richard leaned closer. Only one way to find out. Daniel clicked the file. The video started in darkness. Then a dim yellow light appeared. A parking garage, concrete pillars, echoing footsteps. The camera angle suggested it had been hidden somewhere, perhaps inside a car. 2 men entered the frame. One of them wore a long coat. The other man was instantly recognizable. Judge Alan Whitaker. Daniel leaned forward. The 2 men spoke quietly, but the microphone picked up enough. You're sure the inspection reports are gone? Whitaker asked. The other man nodded. Completely, and the investigators already redirected. Whitaker exhaled slowly. Good. He looked around the garage carefully. We cannot afford another situation like Riverside. The other man smirked. There won't be. Whitaker lowered his voice. The families are still asking questions. They always do. And if the press finds out about the falsified reports, they won't. Then said something that made Daniel's stomach turn. 7 people died, the other man shrugged, and hundreds of millions were protected. Daniel stopped the video. The room was silent again. Richard whispered, "That's a confession." Daniel nodded slowly. Yes, more than that. It was proof. Proof that the judge had knowingly helped bury the investigation. Proof that powerful people had covered up the collapse. Proof that Emily Mercer had been right. But another thought suddenly crossed Daniel's mind. How long ago was this recording made? Richard checked the file timestamp. About 4 months before your wife passed away. Daniel felt his chest tighten, so she was already getting close. Richard nodded. Very close. Daniel stared at the screen. If Emily recorded this meeting, someone might have realized she was watching them. Richard didn't answer, but his silence said enough. A car horn sounded outside the building. Daniel instinctively glanced toward the office window. The street below looked normal. Traffic, pedestrians, city noise. But something about the scene felt different now, as if the world outside had suddenly become dangerous. Daniel closed the laptop. We need to think carefully about what happens next. Richard crossed his arms nervously. You're not planning to go to the police, are you? Daniel looked at him. Why not? Richard pointed at the notebook. Because if judges are involved. He shook his head. You don't know who you can trust. Daniel couldn't argue with that. Emily had uncovered corruption inside city government, inside construction companies, inside regulatory departments, and now inside the judicial system. If the wrong person learned about this evidence, it could disappear overnight. Or worse. Daniel stood up. What time does the bank close? 30 minutes. Good. Richard frowned. Why? Daniel picked up the notebook and flash drive. Because I need to leave before anyone else realizes what I found. Richard nodded. That's probably wise. But just as Daniel reached for the door handle, his phone vibrated in his pocket. An unknown number. Daniel hesitated, then answered, "Hello." For a moment, there was only silence. Then a calm voice spoke. "Mr. Mercer." Daniel froze. The voice was unfamiliar, but something about its tone felt controlled, calculated. "You opened the safety deposit box." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Daniel's grip tightened on the phone. "Who is this?" The voice ignored the question. "Your wife was a very determined woman." Daniel's heart started pounding. "What do you want?" The man continued calmly. "She believed exposing corruption would change the world." Daniel's jaw clenched. "And you didn't like that?" The voice chuckled softly. "You misunderstand. We simply believe some secrets should remain buried. Daniel's eyes narrowed. You're the man from the bank lobby. Silence again. Then the voice replied. Yes. Daniel felt anger rising inside him. You're the one who came looking for the box after Emily died. Yes, and now you're calling me. Yes. Daniel's voice hardened. Why? The answer came quietly. Because you are now holding something very dangerous. Daniel glanced at the notebook. You mean evidence? No. The voice corrected him. I mean leverage. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. The man continued. You see, Mr. Mercer, the evidence your wife collected could destroy many powerful people. Daniel said nothing. But it could also destroy you. Daniel's stomach tightened. What are you talking about? The man's tone changed slightly. Less polite, more serious. You haven't looked at all the files yet. Daniel's mind raced. What files? The voice spoke slowly. The ones your wife never wanted you to see. Daniel felt his chest tighten. What do you mean? Then the man said something that made Daniel's blood run cold. Your wife didn't start investigating corruption. He let the words hang in the air. She started investigating you. Daniel stopped breathing. What? The voice remained calm. She discovered something about your past. Daniel's mind spun. That's impossible, is it? The man continued. Mr. Mercer, before your wife died, she uncovered a secret about you that connects directly to the Riverside collapse. Daniel's hand trembled slightly. That's not true. The voice answered quietly. You should watch the last video on the flash drive. Then the line went dead. Daniel slowly lowered the phone. Richard stared at him. What happened? Daniel's voice was barely above a whisper. He said Emily was investigating me. Richard frowned. That makes no sense. Daniel looked back at the laptop. One file remained unopened. The last video on the flash drive. And suddenly, Daniel wasn't sure he wanted to see it, because, in that moment, Daniel Mercer realized something deeply unsettling. For 3 years, he believed his wife had died with secrets he never understood. But what if the biggest secret she uncovered was about him? And what Daniel Mercer was about to learn next would completely change the story of the Riverside collapse, and the story of his own life. Daniel Mercer stared at the laptop. The final video file waited on the screen, unopened, silent. For the first time since entering the bank, Daniel felt genuine fear. Not fear of the man who had called him, not fear of the corruption network, but fear of what his own wife might have discovered. Across the desk, Richard Holloway spoke carefully. What did the caller say exactly? Daniel swallowed. He said Emily started investigating me. Richard frowned immediately. That doesn't make sense. Daniel shook his head slowly. No, it doesn't. For 22 years, Emily had trusted him, shared everything. Never once had she questioned his work, or his past, or his career at least. That's what Daniel believed. Until now, Daniel looked back at the screen. The final video file name was simple. Daniel, watch this last. His chest tightened. She recorded something specifically for me, he said quietly. Richard crossed his arms nervously. You don't have to watch it here. Daniel nodded, but he didn't move, because the question had already taken hold in his mind. What did Emily think she discovered? Finally, he clicked the file. The video began the same way the previous one had. Emily sat at a table. The same quiet room, the same steady camera, but this time her expression looked different, more conflicted, more emotional. She took a long breath before speaking. Daniel, if you're watching this, then you've already seen the evidence I collected about the Riverside collapse. Daniel leaned closer to the screen. Emily continued. You're probably confused about why I started investigating it. Her voice softened. The truth is, I didn't start with the city. Daniel felt a cold sensation in his chest. I started with you. The room went silent. Emily folded her hands together. I want you to understand something first. Her voice remained calm. I never wanted to believe what I discovered. Daniel whispered under his breath. What are you talking about? Emily continued. 3 years before the Riverside collapse, she lifted a document into view. You were hired as a structural consultant on the project. Daniel's eyes widened. Richard looked shocked. You never mentioned that, he said quietly. Daniel shook his head. I barely remember it. Emily continued explaining. It was a small contract. You reviewed the original structural design before construction began. Daniel's heart began pounding. He did remember that job now. A brief consulting review. Just a few weeks of work. He had flagged several issues with the original design. Then the developers hired someone else to finalize the plans. At the time it seemed normal, but now Emily's voice continued. You submitted a report recommending stronger support beams. Daniel's chest tightened. Yes, but Emily continued speaking. And your report was rejected. Daniel froze. Emily held up another document. A construction blueprint. The company replaced your design recommendation with a cheaper alternative, Richard whispered. That's common in construction projects. Daniel nodded slowly. Yes, but Emily continued. And 6 months later, she pointed at a highlighted section of the blueprint. The revised structure passed inspection. Daniel leaned closer, his heart beating faster. Emily's voice grew heavier. The inspector who approved it was later paid $42,000. Daniel's stomach dropped, the same amount written beside Councilman Halstead's name in the notebook. Emily continued speaking. You didn't know any of this at the time. Daniel exhaled slowly. Of course he didn't. He had simply moved on to other projects, forgotten about Riverside entirely, until the collapse happened. Then Emily said something that changed everything, but someone else knew. Daniel stared at the screen. Emily answered. The developers. She looked directly into the camera. They knew your original report warned the structure might fail. Daniel felt his pulse racing again. Emily continued. And if investigators ever discovered that report, the entire corruption network would collapse with it, Richard whispered. That means Daniel finished the sentence. They buried my report. Emily nodded in the video. They removed it from the project file. Daniel clenched his jaw. That's illegal. Emily nodded again. Yes, but then she said the part that made Daniel's blood run cold. And after the Riverside collapse, she lowered her voice. They used your name to protect themselves. Daniel stared at the screen. What? Emily continued. They claimed you approved the revised design. Daniel jumped to his feet. That's a lie. Richard looked stunned. But if they forged your approval, he stopped, realizing the implication. Daniel finished it. Then I became their scapegoat. Emily's voice filled the room again. That's when I started investigating. Daniel sat down slowly. She hadn't suspected him. She had been trying to clear his name. Emily continued. I knew you would never approve something unsafe, so I started digging. Her eyes hardened slightly, and the deeper I looked, she shook her head. The more corruption I found. Daniel leaned forward. Emily's voice softened again. I never told you because I didn't want you involved. But once I realized how powerful these people were, I started preparing evidence, Daniel whispered. For after you were gone. Emily nodded slowly. If anything happened to me, I wanted someone to finish the investigation. Daniel's chest tightened, and I hoped that someone would be you. Then Emily said one last thing. But there's something you need to know. Daniel looked closer. Emily leaned toward the camera. The man leading this corruption network, she spoke the name slowly, is the same man who tried to access the safety deposit box after my death. Daniel's pulse quickened. Emily finished the sentence. His name is Victor Langford. Daniel froze. Richard whispered, Victor Langford. Daniel nodded slowly. I know that name. Richard looked confused. How? Daniel looked back at the screen because Langford Construction, he swallowed, was the company that replaced my design. Richard's eyes widened. The same company involved in Riverside. Yes. Daniel's voice grew colder, and if he buried my report, he clenched his fist, then he's the reason 7 people died. The video ended. The room fell silent. Daniel stared at the blank screen. 3 years of grief suddenly mixed with anger. Emily hadn't suspected him. She had been protecting him and exposing the truth, but someone had stopped her before she could finish. Daniel slowly closed the laptop. Richard spoke carefully. What are you going to do? Daniel looked at the notebook, the flash drive, the evidence. Then he answered, I'm going to finish what Emily started. Richard hesitated. You realize the man behind this network just called you? Daniel nodded. Yes, and he already knows you have the evidence. Daniel looked toward the window. Night was beginning to fall over the city. That's fine, Richard frowned. How is that fine? Daniel answered quietly. Because now I know something he doesn't. Richard waited. Daniel picked up the notebook. My report still exists somewhere. Richard nodded slowly. Yes. Daniel's voice hardened. And when I find it, he looked back at the laptop screen. Victor Langford won't be able to bury the truth again, and in that moment, Daniel Mercer stopped being a grieving husband. He became the one person capable of exposing the entire corruption network his wife died investigating. But Daniel still didn't know something. Victor Langford wasn't just protecting his business empire. He was protecting a secret that connected the Riverside collapse to a second disaster that hadn't happened yet. And if Daniel didn't uncover the truth soon, history was about to repeat itself. Daniel Mercer stepped out of the bank just as the evening lights flickered on across the city. Cars moved slowly along the street. People walked past the entrance without noticing him. To them, this was just another normal night. But Daniel knew something they didn't. Somewhere in this city, another disaster was already being planned. And the people responsible had been getting away with it for decades. Because Emily Mercer's investigation had uncovered a pattern, a system, built cheap, hide the evidence, let time erase the danger. And when the buildings eventually failed, collect millions rebuilding them. The Riverside collapse wasn't the first failure. And if Emily's notes were correct, it wouldn't be the last. Daniel drove home in silence. The flash drive rested in his jacket pocket. The notebook lay on the passenger seat. Streetlights blurred past the windshield as his mind raced. Victor Langford, Langford Construction, the company that had replaced his structural recommendations years ago, the company that had buried his report, and the same company now connected to the corruption network Emily had exposed. Daniel pulled into his driveway. For 3 years, this house had been filled with memories. Emily's voice in the kitchen, her books on the coffee table, her laughter in the hallway. Tonight, the house felt different. Not empty, but unfinished. Daniel placed the notebook on the kitchen table. He began reading Emily's notes again, this time more carefully. Names, dates, locations. The deeper he looked, the more he realized something strange. Emily hadn't just documented past corruption. She had been tracking something current. Active. He flipped another page, then another. Then he stopped, because one page had been circled heavily in red ink, 3 times. At the top of the page was the name of a project. Harbor Point Residential Tower. Daniel frowned. He recognized the development. It had been all over the news recently. A luxury high-rise being built along the waterfront. Construction almost complete. Grand opening scheduled in 2 months. Daniel read Emily's notes beside the project name. Then his heart began beating faster, because the numbers written there looked very familiar. Steel support reduction, 28% concrete grade substituted. Inspection reports signed early. Daniel whispered to himself, no, it was the same pattern, exactly the same pattern as Riverside. Daniel grabbed the laptop and opened the files again. He searched through the documents Emily had collected, emails, contracts, permit approvals. Within minutes he found it. Langford Construction, lead contractor for Harbor Point Tower. Daniel leaned back slowly. If Emily was right, that building was already compromised, and once thousands of people moved in, the consequences could be catastrophic. Because the terrifying part wasn't the corruption itself, it was the timeline. Buildings like Harbor Point were designed to stand for decades, but if Emily's notes were accurate, the structural weaknesses would begin showing much sooner. And once those weaknesses appeared, the same companies responsible for building the tower would be hired to repair it. The same cycle, the same profits, the same danger. Daniel picked up his phone. He searched online for Harbor Point Tower. Dozens of articles appeared. Luxury apartments, waterfront views, grand opening ceremony planned next month. And one headline caught his attention. City officials to attend Harbor Point opening gala. Daniel read the list of attendees, mayor, council members, developers, and one name stood out immediately. Victor Langford. Daniel exhaled slowly. The same man who had just called him. The same man responsible for Riverside. The same man who knew Daniel now had the evidence, and in a few weeks, that man would be celebrating the opening of another building built the same way. Daniel closed the article. There was only one way to stop it. He needed proof that Langford had buried his original Riverside report, because that report would expose everything. The corruption, the forged approval, the cover-up, and if investigators reopened the Riverside case, every other project connected to Langford Construction would come under scrutiny, including Harbor Point. Daniel opened Emily's notebook again, flipping through the pages quickly. Then he found another note written in the margin. Original report archived, city records, storage. Daniel stared at the words. City records storage. That meant the document might still exist. Somewhere inside the municipal archive building, buried among thousands of files, forgotten, ignored. But if Daniel could find it, Langford's entire network would collapse. But Daniel Mercer didn't realize something yet. Victor Langford wasn't just powerful, he was careful. And the moment Daniel left the bank earlier that evening, Langford had already started preparing for the next move, because Langford understood one thing very clearly. Evidence was dangerous, but witnesses were even more dangerous. Daniel stood up from the table. He grabbed the notebook, the flash drive, his car keys. He needed to reach the city archive building before the office closed, but just as he stepped outside, a black sedan slowly pulled to the curb across the street. Its headlights turned off. The engine remained running. Daniel froze. The driver's door opened, and the tall man from the bank lobby stepped out. Victor Langford. He leaned casually against the car, calm, confident, waiting. Daniel walked toward him slowly. Langford smiled slightly. I wondered how long it would take before you realized the truth. Daniel stopped several feet away. You buried my report. Langford shrugged. You weren't supposed to find out. Daniel clenched his fists. 7 people died. Langford's expression didn't change. Yes, Daniel stared at him in disbelief. And you don't care, Langford answered calmly. You're looking at this emotionally. Daniel stepped closer. You're looking at it like a murderer. Langford tilted his head slightly. No. Then he said something that made Daniel feel a cold wave of anger. I'm looking at it like a businessman because Victor Langford believed something that had guided his entire career. Buildings fail, people forget, money remains, but Langford had made one mistake. He underestimated the one thing he thought he had already erased. Emily Mercer's investigation, and the man now standing in front of him, had just decided to finish it. Langford straightened his jacket. I'm going to offer you something, Mr. Mercer. Daniel said nothing. Langford continued. You walk away from this, you forget the notebook, you forget the flash drive. Daniel's eyes narrowed, and in return, Langford smiled slightly. You live a peaceful life. Daniel shook his head slowly. That's not happening, Langford sighed. I expected that answer. Daniel stepped closer. I'm going to find the original report. Langford looked almost amused. You won't. Daniel's voice hardened. Watch me then, he spoke quietly. Mr. Mercer, if that report is ever discovered, he looked directly into Daniel's eyes. Harbor Point Tower will be shut down immediately. Daniel nodded. That's the idea. Langford shook his head slowly. You still don't understand. Daniel frowned. What? Langford answered calmly. The tower isn't the problem. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. What are you talking about? Langford's smile faded. The problem is the bridge. Daniel's heart skipped bridge. Langford nodded once. Then he said the words that changed everything. The Harbor Bridge renovation project. Daniel froze. The Harbor Bridge was the busiest bridge in the city. Tens of thousands of vehicles crossed it every day. Langford continued calmly. Construction started 6 months ago. Daniel's chest tightened and Langford's voice remained steady. The same engineers, the same inspectors, the same shortcuts. Daniel stared at him. You're lying. Langford shook his head slowly. No. Then he finished the sentence, and unlike a parking garage, he looked toward the city skyline. A bridge collapse doesn't kill 7 people. Because in that moment, Daniel Mercer realized the true scale of what Emily had uncovered. Riverside wasn't the end of the corruption. It was just the beginning, and somewhere in the city, a bridge carrying thousands of people every day might already be standing on the same dangerous foundation. Victor Langford's words hung in the air like a storm waiting to break the bridge. Daniel Mercer stared at him. The harbor bridge carried thousands of cars every hour, commuters, families, school buses, delivery trucks. If Langford was telling the truth, the same corruption that caused the Riverside collapse had now infected something far bigger. Daniel's voice dropped. You're bluffing. Langford shook his head calmly. No. Daniel felt a cold weight settle in his chest. You're telling me you cut corners on a bridge? Langford tilted his head slightly. You're asking the wrong question. Daniel stepped closer. What's the right question? Langford answered without hesitation. How many people would notice if the project cost 50 million less than expected? Daniel clenched his jaw. People would notice when it collapses. Langford's expression remained calm. It won't collapse tomorrow. Daniel's anger rose. You said the same thing about Riverside. Langford didn't reply, and that silence said everything, because Daniel Mercer had just realized something terrifying. Victor Langford believed time erased consequences. If a building failed 10 years later, no one would connect it to the original decision. No one would remember who signed the permits. No one would trace the payments, and the people responsible would already be richer than ever. But Langford had overlooked one thing. Emily Mercer had documented everything. Daniel took a step back. You think threatening me will make me walk away? Langford shrugged slightly. I think you're smart enough to understand reality. Daniel pointed toward the city skyline. That bridge carries thousands of people every day. Langford said nothing. Daniel's voice hardened. If you're lying, I'll expose you. Langford crossed his arms. And if I'm telling the truth, Daniel met his gaze. Then I'll expose you faster. Langford studied him for a moment. Then he sighed. You remind me of your wife. Daniel felt his chest tighten. She believed the truth mattered more than power. Langford's voice was almost curious. And look where that belief got her. Daniel's anger exploded. You're saying you killed her? Langford didn't react, but his silence answered the question more clearly than words, because in that moment, Daniel Mercer realized the worst truth of all. Emily Mercer hadn't just been racing against corruption. She had been racing against time, and someone had decided she was getting too close. Daniel looked directly at Langford. You made one mistake. Langford raised an eyebrow. What's that? Daniel pulled the flash drive from his pocket. You let her finish the investigation. Langford's expression tightened slightly. Daniel continued. She documented everything. Langford glanced at the drive. That's unfortunate. Daniel nodded. For you, Langford shook his head slowly. You still don't understand. Daniel frowned. Understand what? Langford's voice remained calm. Evidence disappears. Daniel shook his head. Not this time. Langford smiled faintly. Why? Daniel answered quietly. Because you're not the only one who planned ahead. Langford's expression changed for the first time. Just slightly. Daniel continued. Emily sent copies of the files to multiple locations. Langford's eyes narrowed. Daniel pointed toward the city, and tonight the first copy was delivered to a journalist. Langford's calm mask cracked. Just a little. Daniel continued. Another copy went to a federal investigator. Langford said nothing, and a third copy. Daniel held up the flash drive. Is about to go to the State Engineering Board. Langford's smile finally disappeared, because Victor Langford had spent his entire career controlling information, burying reports, destroying evidence, silencing witnesses. But Emily Mercer had prepared for that. She didn't trust one system, she trusted many. And once the truth started moving through multiple hands, no single person could stop it. Langford stepped closer to Daniel. You're making a mistake. Daniel shook his head. No. Langford's voice lowered. You think exposing corruption will fix the system? Daniel answered immediately. No. Langford frowned. Then why do it? Daniel looked him directly in the eyes. Because people deserve to know the truth. Langford stared at him for several seconds. Then he sighed. You really are like her. Daniel didn't respond. Langford stepped back toward his car. But before getting inside, he said one last thing. You may win this battle. Daniel watched him carefully. But systems like this never disappear. Langford opened the car door. They just learned to hide better. Then he got inside and drove away. Victor Langford believed power protected him. But within 48 hours, everything changed. Investigators reopened the Riverside collapse case. Daniel's original structural report was discovered inside the city archives. The report proved the building should never have been approved. Emails revealed the falsified inspection reports. Bank transfers exposed the bribery network. And the recordings Emily Mercer collected confirmed everything. The consequences came quickly. Councilman Robert Halstead was arrested. Several city inspectors resigned. Judge Alan Whitaker stepped down from the bench. And Victor Langford, the man who believed secrets stayed buried, was indicted on multiple federal charges. But the most important discovery came last. Engineers inspected the Harbor Bridge renovation project, and they found exactly what Emily Mercer had suspected. Substandard materials, unauthorized design changes, structural shortcuts. Repairs began immediately. And thousands of lives were protected because someone refused to stay silent. Because sometimes the people who change the world never live long enough to see it happen. Emily Mercer never saw the truth exposed. She never saw the corruption network collapse. But her investigation made it possible. And the man she trusted most finished the work she started. Weeks later, Daniel visited Emily's grave. He placed the notebook beside the flowers. The wind moved gently through the trees. I did it, he whispered. For a moment the world was quiet. Then he added one more sentence. You were right. Before you go, if this story stayed with you, if any part of it made you think about the systems that operate quietly behind everyday life, then you understand why stories like this matter. Sometimes the truth doesn't disappear. It waits, hidden in documents, buried in forgotten reports, locked inside a small steel box in a bank vault. And sometimes, all it takes is one person brave enough to open it. If you enjoy stories that uncover the secrets people try to hide, consider subscribing to the Untold Story Files. And before you leave, tell us in the comments where are you watching from tonight. Because the next story might come from your city.